And Mom, how tough has it been for you?
Oh, hard. I said, yep. Really hard.
What was the hardest part?
Oh. When we couldn't see her, that was the hardest part. It was just helpless. I mean, nothing you could do. You couldn't hold her hand. That was probably the hardest.
It will be a long road to recovery. Just yesterday, Kelly was able to take her first steps since getting out of that coma. Her mother is thrilled and so grateful to have her daughter back. But again, she could have months of rehab ahead of her. It's just such a devastating situation for so many of these COVID patients. Even those that make a recovery still have to deal with these long-term impacts. Many of them do. And right now there are many who are inside, unable to communicate directly with friends and family except maybe through a Zoom call or a FaceTime. It is frustrating not just for those patients and their families, but also for the medical workers who are also dealing with an incredible amount of stress right now. And Minnesota also just reported another record when it comes to daily COVID deaths. Allison?
More than 65,000 Americans are in the hospital right now, according to the COVID tracking project. Dr. Fauci saying help is on the way, but don't let your guard down yet.
Help is really on the way. You know, if you think of it metaphorically, you know, the cavalry is coming here. Vaccines are going to have a major positive impact. So if we could just hang in there, do the public health measures that we're talking about, we're going to get this under control, I promise you.
CDC-trained epidemiologist Dr. Kelly Henning joins me now. Dr. Henning, thanks so much for being with us. Daily cases, hospitalizations, breaking records in all sorts of cities, states across the country. These numbers are worse than they were in the spring. But Dr. Fauci sounded pretty hopeful there. Are you?
I think we're going to face a really tough couple of months. But the optimism comes from the fact that we now have vaccines on the horizon, and we're starting to hear some really good news about vaccines. But at the very immediate moment, we have remarkably large numbers of cases occurring, as well as increasing hospitalizations and reduced capacity in ICUs. So we have to take this very seriously. The thing that's different now from the spring is that the whole country's involved. Really, if you look at the map, there's no region that's spared. It's really every state that's facing growing numbers of cases. So we have to take this very seriously.
On the vaccine front, Moderna is saying that its phase 3 trials are finished and it will know by the end of the month if its vaccine works. What kind of data, what kind of results and information will you be looking for there?
So Moderna has a messenger RNA and mRNA vaccine very similar in structure to the Pfizer vaccine that was discussed just a few days ago. In the case of the Pfizer vaccine, they're reporting 90% effectiveness of that vaccine, which really exceeds what most public health and medical professionals expected. So we would hope that Moderna may actually have something similar, but we'll have to see when the data comes out.
Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is bringing back a stay-at-home advisory in her city starting Monday. Here's what she said about it today.
Stay at home unless you must go out for essential reasons like work or school, medical visits, or to get food. No visitors should be in your home unless they're essential workers like home health care or education workers. And no visitors includes family members that do not now today live with you.
Do you think that more cities and states need to take these kinds of measures?
You know, it's interesting when you look at these measures around the country, states and cities have a real patchwork of measures. There's a little bit of stay at home. There's a little bit of mask wearing discussion. It really varies by where you are. And it's really about following the data. We want to keep people safe. We want everyone to wear masks when they're not at home with their loved ones. And we want people to stay their distances. And as the data shows that increasing cases and increasing deaths and increasing hospitalizations, then the political persons in charge are going to have to issue more stringent stay-at-home orders. We'd like to avoid mass lockdowns because that is really problematic for the economy and for many other aspects of life, but we do need to keep people safe.
How about the 10 p.m. restaurant and bar curfew in New York and New Jersey? What do you think of that rule? Is that effective? Does it make sense?
I think we have to see.
Okay.
One thing about New York is they have extremely good data. They report their positivity rates by county, by neighborhood, basically every day. So when they put these orders in place now, I think we'll be able to actually judge just how effective they are. In theory, what they're trying to do is reduce crowded locations with lots of people close together. And we'll see if this is enough or if they need to do more.
You're not kidding about the New York data. My mom loves to check in with me and let me know how bad it is where she lives compared with how I live. I mean, you could really hone in and see just what's going on in different neighborhoods. I'd like to play what Dr. Fauci said about whether the slow transition from a Trump to a Biden White House will make it harder to get the virus under control, and then get your take on the other side. Trump campaign advisor Corey Lewandowski has tested positive for the coronavirus, but sources say he is feeling fine. Yep, that Corey Lewandowski from the Four Seasons Landscaping press conference, who's been leading the charge to challenge the election results. Meanwhile, President Trump has been out of sight with no public events on his schedule again today. Here's what White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany said about that earlier.
I think you'll hear from the president at the right moment. He gave a press conference, of course, last Thursday, but right now he's letting this litigation play out, letting his lawyers take the lead on this while he stays hard at work for the American people on COVID and other matters. But you will be hearing from the president. You hear from him on Twitter. You'll be hearing from him at the right moment.
President-elect Joe Biden meeting with transition advisors today as he starts building his cabinet and his White House team. Overnight, the president-elect tapped Ron Klain to be his chief of staff. Klain served as Biden's chief of staff when he was vice president and has worked with Biden since the late 80s. So let's talk Trump and Biden. NBC News White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell is here, along with NBC News correspondent Mike Memoli, who's in Wilmington, Delaware. Kelly, I'll start with you and Corey Lewandowski's positive COVID test. One of several people with connections to the president who's tested positive just this week. What is the White House saying and doing about this latest outbreak?
Well, the White House is not weighing in on this. And Corey Lewandowski, of course, is a longtime ally and associate of the president. And one of the difficulties his condition presents in political terms, apart from his own well-being and health, is that he has been part of this movement on the part of Trump allies to be public and to try to push for the public to give the president time to litigate and to try to find some way to overturn the results of the election to the president's favor. So this takes Corey Lewandowski out of that, given his positive case. And he says he has not much in the way of symptoms. And this was a test where it is our understanding that he did a test separate from the White House. So this was not one of the tests where people are seeing the president and get screened. Oftentimes, those are the positives that we hear about with so many people in the president's circle with a couple of different events. Most recently, it was the election night party in the East Room that led to a number of cases, including the chief of staff, Mark Meadows. There were also other cases tied to the vice president, not him personally, but staffers, and clearly the first family and others. So there have been literally a few dozen people in the president's orbit. And this week alone, several staffers, both at the White House and then these outside political allies, including David Bossie, also the chief of staff at the RNC. And they are suffering from this illness, just like the country is seeing these surges that's happening in Trump world as well. So one of the challenges is politically, how can he be effective at a time when days are at issue? And it also reinforces some of the questions about how they have been carrying out practices of mask wearing and social distancing or not doing that. And that has been a recurring problem with people associated with the White House who aren't following some of the public health guidelines. We know that Mike Pence, the vice president, did hold since the election one coronavirus task force meeting that they have released some photos of. So we know that it occurred since the election. But the White House has not been talking about coronavirus since Election Day in any meaningful way and not dealing with, at least publicly, the surges that we're seeing around the country.
Kelly, we haven't seen the president today, but he did sign an executive order on China. What can you tell us about that?
This is an effort to try to keep American investors who could be buying shares in publicly traded companies that invest in equipment and funding that goes to the Chinese Communist Party because of relationships they have with companies. So basically, China using the free market system to try to generate revenue. And the president has signed an order saying that Americans cannot own stock or have a piece of any of those companies. And about 30 of them have been identified. We've already heard from Marco Rubio on the Hill, who had similar legislation drafted. The idea is unwittingly Americans could invest in mutual funds or other investments, not knowing that those investments and the companies associated could have ties to the military in China, therefore helping them to get stronger, bigger, and more supplied, and the Communist Party in China. So it's one of the ways that President Trump is pushing back on China, especially in the wake of the virus that he blames and frequently calls the China virus, despite early in the administration having some improved relationship with China over trade. Obviously, the coronavirus has changed that, and the president has said that he has some very strong feelings about China. This may be one of the examples where they're trying to reinforce an anti-China view by taking this action. Investors would have until January to divest themselves if they have some of those kinds of accounts. And certainly it would be a signal to big investment firms that run mutual funds and things like that, that they couldn't buy and put their clients in those companies any longer. Allison?
Let's go to you, Mike, and talk about the Biden transition for a minute, what we should know about Ron Klain as chief of staff. We know he and Joe Biden go back a long way. What does his appointment tell us about the type of team that Joe Biden's putting together?
Yeah, Allison, Biden insiders have been telling me for weeks, really, even before the election, that if he were to win, Ron Klain was the likeliest choice for chief of staff. That's in part because of what you just mentioned. They go back more than 3 decades. He worked on his 1988 campaign. He was the chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee when Biden was the chairman, and then, of course, also his chief of staff in the White House. But as one transition advisor put it, Klain is uniquely suited to this position at this time, and that has everything to do with his role in the Obama administration as the Ebola czar, helping to marshal the administration's response to that global health crisis. Of course, one of the major challenges a Biden administration is going to confront is dealing with the pandemic, and that requires an all-of-government approach, and Klain has experience across the government to do it. And I think that speaks to exactly what the messages Biden wants to send, that they want to empower and reinvest in the federal workforce. It's going to require a real effort to build up the bureaucracy and across agencies in order to deal with this. And now with Klain in place, interestingly, the former vice president, the president-elect, has left today to go down to Rehoboth Beach, a couple hours south of here, his beach house there, for a little bit of R&R. Klain helping to make some final decisions in consultation with the president-elect about other staff decisions. We expect to hear more of those next week, in fact. But a busy week for Biden that has included today a phone call from Pope Francis, in fact.
Yeah, we heard that today. That call reported a little bit earlier, Mike. Kelly, let me ask you, the president and his legal team going ahead with election lawsuits that, for the most part, legal experts do not think will make any difference in the election outcome. What else do they have in their arsenal here besides stalling the transition? And I think a question we just keep asking at all different phases of this election, how long could this go on?
Well, the timing factor is one that may ultimately may coincide with when states certify their results, because it becomes almost impossible to have litigation after those state certifications take place, and those vary by state. And of course, there are only a handful of states involved where the Trump side believes there might be some way to overturn the results. Very few people think that while there can be incidents of voter fraud in a small way, that can occur. We have not seen evidence of it, and certainly not on the kind of numbers or scale that would have a change in the outcome. We've heard from Karl Rove, who is a longtime Republican expert on matters of how does the party get elected. And by that, I mean he knows where the votes are and what the electorate looks like in every congressional district around the country. That was his expertise for many years. And he's written saying that he does not see that there's any pathway left for President Trump to overturn the election, and that it's appropriate to begin looking to a new administration and to try to facilitate when it comes to the transition. Now, some members of the Republican Senate are speaking out about the issue of transition. They're still saying the president should follow the pathway that he sees fit for looking for recounts or legal options. But they say that doesn't mean you can't also begin a transition and provide to Joe Biden things like intelligence briefings and the presidential daily brief. James Langford of Oklahoma is one of those who says the president can continue to follow his path, but there's no harm done in making certain Joe Biden has the tools that he needs to set up his own government. Here's James Langford from a radio interview where this first became public.
There's nothing wrong with Vice President Biden getting the briefings to be able to prepare himself. And if that's not occurring by Friday, I will step in as well and to be able to push him to say this needs to occur.
And the Trump campaign has been gathering affidavits from voters, from election workers, to try to say that they're finding evidence in various places of things that went wrong or things that somehow harmed the president. But we've not seen anything that comes forward that is making its way through the legal system, that's being supported in that. And again, not to the numbers that are involved here. The margins for the president, even though this is in those few states we're talking about, a fairly close election, fairly close in recount and overturning terms, is usually hundreds of votes, not tens of thousands or thousands. And so it's a very steep climb. The likely path for the president is to find some resolution where he can come to terms with stepping aside and finding some other political outlet for himself, whether it's a political action committee, being a kingmaker in the party going forward, and even, some say, perhaps running again in 2024. But we're just not there yet where the president is willing to publicly acknowledge that he will not be back after January 20th. Allison?
Mike, Senator Elizabeth Warren gave the Washington Post a list of top priorities for the Biden-Harris administration. Things she would like to see, like student loan debt dealt with, lower drug prices, minimum wage, racial equity. We know that the Biden team plans to tackle the coronavirus out of the gate. We're seeing that already. Are these issues top priorities as well?
Member of the U.S. Senate, or potentially she could be a voice on the inside of a Biden administration, although the makeup of the Senate, the fact that there is a Republican governor in Massachusetts, makes it a much harder decision for the Biden team to choose her. Now, the other interesting part of this is, some of the work that Senator Warren did with Biden during the campaign after the end of that primary on issues like student debt, where they came together and Biden moved toward her position on some issues of college affordability, racial equity, a major part of Biden's general election argument, especially in the wake of George Floyd. And so these are certainly priorities of his. The question is, given that narrow makeup of the Senate, the clear signal that the Biden team was sending over the course of the summer as they were rolling out their economic plan was that they envisioned being able to do sort of one maybe significant large stimulus-style bill that would also include a number of other things, maybe including the minimum wage, maybe including a significant effort to reform college affordability issues. With a much narrower now margin, at best 50-50 for the Democrats, it makes that kind of major bill much harder potentially to get through. And so having Senator Warren as somebody who could help advocate these positions from the outside could be of use to the Biden administration in building public support, but it's still going to be a very heavy lift.
Mike, I have to ask a question. One of the things I have most enjoyed over the past 4 years is that when it gets freezing cold here in the Northeast around the holidays, we head down to Mar-a-Lago, where Kelly O'Donnell pops up, resplendent under the Florida sunshine with palm trees behind her. It brings a smile to my face. Can we expect to see a little more Mike Memoli, maybe hanging out in his board shorts in Rehoboth Beach? Is that what's coming?
That is a glimpse of our potential presidential summer vacations to come. Biden also, a favorite place of his to go get away a little bit is Kiawah Island, South Carolina. I heartily endorse that as a destination as well. And he used to spend some Christmases in the Virgin Islands. So a number of options that would be attractive to the White House press corps when we have to do some of those vacation stakeouts.
Okay, we need to start negotiating that News Now travels as well. That is sounding pretty good. Kelly O'Donnell, Mike Memoli, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
As the vote totals came in, NBC News projected wins in battleground states for Joe Biden, including Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. That's that so-called blue wall of Democratic strongholds that Donald Trump broke last time around. But the often talked about state of Ohio did not